It looks like we have a majority of people with us today, so we're going to get started. Again, my name is Jeff Felice, and I serve as the president of CertNexus. And today we're going to talk about how to learn to harness ChatGPT and other generative AI technologies. I want to thank GoPass for hosting today's webinar and for inviting me to participate. I look forward to spending the next hour with you. What we'll see is about 45 minutes of that will be content, and then we'll have time for questions at the end. Just put any questions you have in the chat or Q&A, and I'll answer those at the end as well. So again, my name is Jeff Felice, and I serve as the president for CertNexus, as I shared. So if you're not familiar with CertNexus, we're a global certification body of vendor-neutral emerging technology certifications and micro-credentials. So emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence, as we'll talk about today, also data science, data and AI ethics, cybersecurity, and IoT as well. So what will we discuss today? First, we're going to define what generative AI is. Then we're going to discuss how generative AI is augmenting human tasks. We'll describe what makes a good prompt. We're going to then deliberate some of the ethical challenges associated with generative AI and AI in general, and consider what's next for generative AI. And then, as I shared, we'll have Q&A at the end as well. So we're going to start by defining what generative AI is. But before we do that, we probably need to step back and define what artificial intelligence is. Although it's still often debated exactly what the definition is, most will agree that artificial intelligence is the ability of machines to exhibit human-like intelligence. So what does that mean? It means that machines in an autonomous fashion are able to do things like make predictions, are able to operate in robotics, for example, in an autonomous fashion. So essentially things that we can do as a human that allow us to think and make decisions, and also to act in our physical environment. This is what is prescribed as artificial intelligence, essentially the ability for machines in an autonomous fashion to be able to exhibit intelligence that would be typically prescribed to humans. Generative AI is a type of artificial intelligence that refers to artificial intelligence where we generate new, or what we call novel content, by inputting content. So if you're familiar with artificial intelligence, much of what artificial intelligence has done up until generative AI has classified or clustered information, essentially using information to make predictions. Well, with generative AI, we're doing something unique here, because what we're doing is we'll be inputting some type of content that could be text, images, audio, video, etc. And we're out in what we call as a prompt, and we'll talk more about what that is. And then we get an output, and that output is some type of novel content. Again, that could be text, images, video, code, and more, as we'll learn about. You may recognize some of the logos on the left-hand side. Some of the leading generative AI technologies are coming from organizations like OpenAI, which also has been invested in and adopted by Microsoft. We also see Google has made significant investments in generative AI. So has Meta. If you're not familiar, they actually just released their latest model, the Llama model, which is actually open source. There's other companies like Stable Diffusion. And then OpenAI actually has more than just ChatGPT, but they also have DALL-E 2. DALL-E 2 is a different type of generative AI model that focuses on images, where ChatGPT is text-based. And many of you may be most familiar with ChatGPT. And ChatGPT is one instance of generative AI. So many times we know that certain brands become almost synonymous with what the product is. Coke is a great example, right? We think of Coke, at least in the US, we think of Coke and we just think of some type of soft drink, a carbonated drink. Another is in the US is adhesive bandages, or plasters as they call them in the UK. We call them Band-Aids because that's the prevailing brand. Well, it's the same thing. Many of us think of generative AI being ChatGPT, but ChatGPT is only one instance of generative AI that's, again, made available from OpenAI that has, again, been licensed by Microsoft and now many others as well. So now that we've defined artificial intelligence, right, the ability for machines to make human-like decisions in an autonomous fashion, and then we also now understand that generative AI is where we input content, and then the model itself will output novel content, meaning new content. And we're seeing this being done widely, but the fact is that we want to understand that this generative AI, although it's really a very sophisticated technology, it's still classified as what we call narrow artificial intelligence, or narrow AI. So what is narrow AI? It is the ability for a machine to approximate human cognitive traits, right? To make decisions, to prescribe, to be prescriptive in its outputs. But it has really no true capacity for reasoning, right? These models are trained. They have, in the case of ChatGPT-4, has hundreds of billions of parameters that has been trained on huge volumes of content. But with that said, it doesn't have the ability to reason like we do as human beings. So it does have the ability, again, to make decisions as humans would, but it's based on essentially the algorithms and the content that it's been trained on. And more importantly, typically these models can only do one thing. So think about ChatGPT, as sophisticated as it is in outputting text. If you ask a ChatGPT to output an image, it can't do it. If you ask it to output audio, it cannot do it, right? There's other models that can, but ChatGPT can only do one thing, which is actually generate text. So this is really our current reality where we have narrow artificial intelligence. Some say we actually may achieve general artificial intelligence, or general AI. And this is where machines will have similar or better cognition than humans. So this means that they'll be able to extrapolate reasoning, right? So they've made one decision and they'll be able to extrapolate through reasoning why another decision should be made and whether it's right or wrong. And more importantly, these models would be able to solve multiple novel problems. There's no AI that's able to do this today. There are some that are in what I'll call research space. There's actually, if you search on Gato from Google DeepMind, they have a AI that is teaching itself new tasks. But again, we haven't achieved general AI. Some say we'll never achieve it. Some think in the next 5 to 10 years. But as we'll talk more about in the ethics sessions as well, we need to have more guardrails as we near general AI, because again, these machines may have similar capabilities to humans as well. So let's discuss how generative AI is augmenting humans, right? So now we understand artificial intelligence, that generative AI is a type of artificial intelligence, that even though as sophisticated as these models are, they're still considered narrow artificial intelligence. But again, they're extremely capable, and they are augmenting us as humans and the tasks we complete. So this McKinsey & Company, which is a large international consulting firm, they did some research, and they wanted to look at some selected examples for generative AI. And again, this is not meant to be an exhaustive list, but just giving examples in 3 primary industries, being banking, retail, and pharmaceutical and healthcare. And you can see that there's a large number of tasks that can be facilitated or augmented by generative AI. So we can see things like, for example, with product R&D and software, right? how potentially converting legacy code or optimizing migration of legacy frameworks. We see in retail where we can actually start to accelerate writing a copy for marketing content and advertising scripts. We can also see potentially in pharmaceutical and medical products where we're starting to draft legal agreements and other regulatory and how we comply with other regulatory requirements. And these things are already starting to happen, right? There's law firms that have now adopted generative AI and are using that to write their foundational agreements based on certain prompts or inputs, and we'll learn more what that is. We're seeing generative AI being used widely across marketing, where organizations are using it now to do a multitude of things, including writing blogs, writing social posts, generating email campaigns, and a host of other activities as well. And we are starting to see it in its use in customer service as well, right? As our chatbots get more sophisticated. In fact, that's what ChatGPT is. It's a really sophisticated chatbot. And so we're starting to integrate this now into our customer relationship and service life cycles as well. And again, a variety of other tasks. We'll talk about code and others as well. But the fact is this is a relatively new technology that was really introduced to the masses, to the public, less than a year ago. It was last November when it was first released. And we've already seen significant uptake and implementation of this technology. And it's being utilized across the organization. So again, McKinsey in their research, they looked at where is it being most widely used so far. And what we can see is in areas of such as sales and marketing, as I talked about, the helping to facilitate product art research and development, software engineering. Again, it's not going to replace a programmer, but it can help augment, again, what a programming professional is doing. So it can help them write some foundational code. It can help them actually help notate that code. It may help them write unit tests, et cetera, and things of that nature. And also, as I shared earlier, within customer operations, right? How do we better serve our customers, and how do we do that more immediately and exacting with the use of chatbots as well? And as we'll see, there's a multitude of content that we're able to produce. What I'm going to do now, and some of you may not have seen ChatGPT, so I'm going to do a quick demo of ChatGPT. And so let me just go to ChatGPT. And this is ChatGPT. Anyone can create a free access. And what we're seeing is we're accessing ChatGPT 3.5. That is what has been released to the public. There is ChatGPT that is built on GPT-4. GPT-4 is the latest release of this large language model from OpenAI. The GPT-4 is the commercial version. It's more robust. It's trained on more recent data. It's more capable. It has more parameters. But again, it is the one they're licensing. It's the one they're monetizing. GPT 3.5 is what's been included in ChatGPT, and you can use this at no additional cost. And again, if you're using applications like Microsoft Office, you may already have it integrated in your Microsoft Office as well. So I'm going to do something today. I'm going to just type in some information, and let's just say I want to know how is coffee grown and processed. Right? Most people drink coffee, and so how is it grown and processed? So I'm going to now put this into ChatGPT, and some of you are going to be very familiar with this, but what ChatGPT is doing is, again, it's been trained on a large volume of content that has been essentially scraped from the web primarily, and it has a number of parameters, and what it's doing is it's using a concept called tokenization, where essentially it's weighting, it's essentially anticipating or guessing in a very educated way of what the information I want back. So you can see it does a really good job of telling me how coffee is planted and cultivated, how it flowers and the fruits developed, how it's harvested, And then, as you can see in 4, they actually detail out how it's processed, milled, and roasted, and so forth, right? So I can do something that, again, with very few prompts, I can get a pretty sophisticated response. What if I want to say, how is coffee grown and processed? And I want to do it as explained to a young student. So now what we're hoping to see is, we're going to see, now this is going to be a little bit different. You can see the language is a little bit different now, right? So at the beginning of this, instead of having kind of the formality that we had before, which is coffee is a popular beverage, et cetera, you can see now that the audience has changed. So it says, imagine you have a special plant called the coffee plant, right? It's talking to a young person. The plant likes to live in a warm and sunny places, et cetera. We talk about planting the seeds, taking care of the plants, and then we talk about picking the cherries, taking out the beans, right? So it's the same it's nearly the same prompt, right? But all I said was, instead of describing it generally, let's describe it to a young person, and you can see how the output has changed. So you can see prompting. This is when I'm inputting this text, it's called prompting. There's a whole now specialization of what we call prompt engineering, that can be included in jobs like a marketing manager, research assistant, et cetera. And there's even now what we call new jobs that are being developed called prompt engineers that do this in a very sophisticated way. But I'm just showing you, again, a simple version of this here. We'll do more prompting in some of the upcoming slides here as well. But I just wanted to share with you, for those who had not seen ChatGPT, that's how it works, right? I input text in this case, and I get novel content, new content that is outputted. Now, one thing is a lot of people think is it's just copying other content from the web. It's not. It's actually generating brand new content. Again, it's taking a compilation of what it's learned from it's the data that was trained on, but it's generating new text. So in addition to text, we can see images. So this actually a colleague of mine did this, and you can see they did a photograph of a monkey typing at a typewriter wearing a small hat in an office, and they wanted it to be realistic. So using those prompts, you can see the 4 images that were created. So I thought what I would do is I would actually go to Stable Diffusion, and I'm just going to do, I enjoy cycling, so I'm going to do cycling here, and I'm going to say woman cycling in France with sunflowers in the background. And so I'm putting in these types, and I could put in negative prompts here as well. I can do some other things called inference steps, et cetera. We won't get into that today. But if I input that and I submit it, you're going to see, submit it. Sorry about this. There's a pop-up that it's there. Let me do this again one more time. A woman cycling with sunflowers in the background. Okay, let's submit. There we go. It's happening on the left-hand side. So I'm actually in a queue, so it might take a few minutes here. So we're going to let that play out, and we'll come back to it. But what you're going to see is a woman submitting, or a woman cycling in sunflowers, and we'll come back. You can see I'm in a queue right now. There's a lot of people using this, and I'm 120 something in that queue. So we'll come back to that in a moment. So again, but here's a representative example, again, that you can get actually inputting text and outputting images. Also, Meta, which is the parent company of Facebook, has released a text to video. And then we also have the ability to do code, music, and more as well. So I'm going to actually show you the example from Bard, which is Google's instance of generative AI that's very similar to ChatGPT. Again, I could input the same thing about growing coffee and how it's processed, But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say, I want to do an if-then statement with 3 variables. So if for those who aren't familiar with programming, programming typically will include if-then statements. And what you can see here is that I was able to generate some generic code, right? An if-then statement with 3 variables, and it actually explains that to me as well. Now, again, it doesn't make me a programmer, right? What it does is it allows me to actually write some generic code that I could potentially incorporate into an application that I was developing that I would then be able to go and actually at some point in time compile and then publish, etc. But again, this does not make me a programmer. What you will see from both Google and Microsoft has what they call Copilot, and Google has what they call Duet. And they've included those into their application development environments. And so it does help facilitate what coding professionals are doing in those environments, and it's very specific to coding. So you can't generate images, you can't ask it about coffee when you're in those environments and using them, etc. They're very specific to those environments. Those are what we call limited function models, essentially using these big base models, but using it for a very specific purpose. And you'll also see it again in some of those marketing platforms, et cetera, that we talked about, sales platforms and more. So again, we're using this for a variety to be able to generate a variety of types of content today. So let's describe good prompts. You started to see some of that, right, when I was doing in ChatGPT, where I got more prescriptive, right? But let's step back and talk about what prompt engineering is. So this is the process of refining an input until it produces a desired output. And so again, there is new roles such as prompt engineers, but many of us will start using prompting as we use generative AI in the jobs that we do today as well. So what we'll learn, much like we do when, how we've learned to, be able to become more precise in searching through, whether it's Google or Bing, et cetera, it's the same thing with prompt engineering. The more specific you can be without using too many words, the better the result will be. So, what is a good prompt? And what we'll see again, it's going to be a necessary skill for anyone using AI, as I shared on the prior screen. And there's no universal good prompt. There's good best practices we'll learn, but a prompt is going to change based on the desired output, right? You can see, first I wanted to better understand what how to grow coffee. But then I realized, you know what, I'm talking to a young audience. So I actually want to put it into the terminology and use vocabulary that younger audience would understand, right? So the fact is that there's no universal good prompt, but there's some good best practices. The first is that you're going to build your prompt iteratively. I did that with the coffee example, right? I did one and I realized, oh, hey, I wanted this for a young audience, so I was actually more descriptive than the second one. That's the second best practice is be descriptive. Tell the model what you want and what you potentially don't want, right? So as you do both, it'll start to constrain it and inform it, so it gets very specific. You need to be clear. So instead of using too many weird words, it's better to be use fewer but be very have great clarity in those words. Provide relevant examples when possible. So if you have an example that you want to use to do that, and you can save and reuse. So I'm going to go back to ChatGPT quickly here, and you can see on the left-hand side, I actually have different prompts that I've done. And you can see one of I did in previous 30 days was generative AI roles, right? So I can actually save my prompts. So you can see I said, what are common job roles that use generative AI? Well, if I wanted to get more descriptive, I could say, what are common jobs in finance industry that use generative AI oops, AI that are not marketing roles, right? So now I'm saying, hey, tell me about jobs in the finance industry that use generative AI, but I don't want any that are marketing roles. And so now what you can see the finance industry, they're now going to tell me, here are some potential job roles that are going to use generative AI. See, I got very specific in here. And so you can see, I don't see anything related to marketing, but I see a whole bunch of other job roles, like quants and portfolio managers and fraud detection analysts and actuaries, et cetera, that potentially would use generative AI. So you can see I can get very specific. Now, one thing to note is that, and it's at the bottom here, is that the free version of ChatGPT was trained on data up through September 2021. So the paid version continues to be continuously updated. But if you're using the free one and you want to know something that happened, a current event that happened in 2022, so let me just say or 2023. I'm just trying to think of something that we could say 2023 that would be relevant. I can't think of anything off the top of my head. But if we wanted to, it wouldn't know about it because this model was trained on data up through September 2021. So again, the paid version, which uses GPT-4, and what many companies are licensing, again, will have data that continuously is updated. So that's one thing to note here is that, again, this is going to be, there is some limitations with GPT 3.5, right? The content has been developed on or trained on. The recency of that in the model itself is not as capable now as some of the newer models. So some additional best practices for text generation. You can write as clearly as you can. Ask for sources. This is one thing that we need to understand is that these models can get to the point where if you continue to prompt, they start to what they call hallucinate. It's really confabulation, where they start to not really understand what the truth is anymore and start to provide answers that may be incorrect. And they don't know, right? These models don't know what's right or wrong. They have no moral compass. They don't know what is ethically correct or what's biased or not, et cetera. We'll talk more about that. Know some of the model's restrictions, right? I was just telling you with ChatGPT, one of the restrictions is the data. It hasn't been trained on any data since September 2021, right? Again, that's the free version. If you're using the one based on GPT-4 in a commercial setting, it's going to have more up-to-date data. And you need to keep trying until you get it right, right? It is a learned skill, like it is with anything, right? As we all learned when we started doing Google searches and became more, or Bing searches and became more competent with those. It's very similar here. The better the prompt, the more specific, greater clarity, using examples, omitting certain words, et cetera. Like I did, right? Don't show me marketing roles, show me other roles. You start to get more capable and competent responses from the model. So let's deliberate some of the ethical challenges briefly. So first of all, what is data ethics? For those who aren't familiar, it's simply ethics applied to the creation, collection, and use of data. So the fact is that we're actually generating more data than we ever have before. And we're using that data more than we ever have previously as well, right? So you think about the amount of data. If you actually have any type of fitness tracker, right? If you're using an Apple Watch, a Fitbit, an Oura Ring, a variety of other things, and think about how much data that you're actually generating, right? You think about Apple Health now. Apple's now becoming one of the largest aggregators of biometric data and associated with humans, right? Because of all that data they're collecting. Well, we need to understand about whether they're doing, whether they're collecting that, which the Apple is in an ethical way, and then their ethical use of that data as well. So a subset of this is AI ethics. And this is when we have data ethics in which algorithms are used with data. So not only we just have data, which is again that collection, storage, use, retirement of data, et cetera. But with AI ethics, we're also now talking about the use of data with algorithms. And this is a growing field because one of the challenges we have is that AI doesn't understand human ethics. It doesn't understand, again, as I alluded to earlier, it doesn't have a moral compass. It doesn't understand the difference between right and wrong. What AI is very good at doing is making a prediction. What it's not very good at doing right now is evaluating whether that prediction could potentially include any biases, potentially harm, a group of individuals or an individual. And so we need to make sure that our AI treats human beings responsibly, and that we're not causing harm to humans. There's 5 commonly agreed upon ethical principles when we're talking about ethics in AI, which is privacy, right? So the fact is, again, AI uses a lot of data. We want to ensure that it keeps that data private, that there's some level of accountability. So the AI model itself is not going to be accountable. So who is going to be accountable, right? Is it those that develop the model? Is it those who, in some cases, organizations are licensing the ChatGPT, right? These GPT 3.5 and GPT-4, they're licensing them and creating secondary applications. And so using these models, so is it OpenAI that's responsible? Is it that company that's responsible? Is it your company because they licensed it and that software and are utilizing that? We need to make sure that these models are transparent and we can explain why the decisions they're making. In all honesty, it's getting increasingly harder to do it as these models get larger. So ChatGPT 3, ChatGPT, which was on GPT 3.5, had 175 billion parameters. So think about that, 175 billion parameters, essentially decision points, if you like, that it used, and was trained on such large volumes of data, it's incomprehensible to us in how much data, right? So how do you ensure that as that model continues to evolve, that we understand how it's making its decisions and being able to explain it to others as it's making them? Again, we need to make sure that these models are, again, treat individuals and groups of individuals fairly, and it's non-discriminatory. And then it's safe and secure. And I would extend this even beyond humans, right? For any living being, for our planet, et cetera. We need to make sure that we're producing technology that's not going to cause harm, but also ensures the safety of others as well. So, why is it important? The fact is, as I alluded to, we're having enormous increases in the volumes of data, right? The fact is that, you go back 20 years, and we used to have to, even 10, 15 years ago, many of us were storing data on storage area networks or servers. There was limited space. We were typically doing it in object-oriented databases that were, again, maxed on size, based on our storage capacity, et cetera. But now everything's in the cloud, and it's almost seemingly infinitely extensible and flexible. And so we just collect data like people collect anything, right? In just huge volumes, and right, and the amount of data, again, going back to that wearable device, the amount of data that's generating each and every day, hour, minute, et cetera. We have significant progress in computing power. So we now have what we call GPUs. So most of us are probably familiar with CPUs. Think about CPUs, it's like sports cars, right? They process limited amounts of data, but really rapidly. GPUs are able to actually produce or not produce, but process large volumes of data. They have huge throughputs. They're more like a truck, right? Being able to do that. We have continuously improvements in our algorithmic capabilities. The algorithms that we have today are far more advanced than they were just even several years ago. And we're starting now to combine techniques to actually become more innovative in how we actually use the various types of AI, which we're not getting into today, but there's machine learning and deep learning, but now we're starting to combine some of those together. There's no international regulation. The EU is in the process of developing and expected to pass the EU AI Act, which will help regulate some of this. But again, as the EU started to develop the EU AI Act, they had not fully anticipated generative AI. So how does that get incorporated in here? And then how does it impact the rest of the world? And again, we have to realize for the first time we have machines making decisions without human intervention. And that's why this is necessary. Some generative AI, specific AI ethical concerns related to generative AI is accuracy and truthfulness, right? Again, we're taking what this generative AI model output, right, with ChatGPT is now we all think that coffee's grown a certain way, it's processed a certain way, etc. I need to make sure that I validate that, right? Because again, the model's providing us with the information based on what it predicts the information we want. But again, it may not have it be as accurate as we like. Again, it can amplify any existing bias and discrimination. There's a definitive gender bias. If you type in, Stable Diffusion, et cetera, show me a picture or in ChatGPT, describe me a CEO. And if there's any gender, it typically describes a male versus a female. We need to understand where the data provenance and the quality of the data. So again, these large language models that constitute generative AI were just trained on huge volumes of data. But again, a lot of that data came from US websites. There's others as well, but mostly English speaking, et cetera. So we have to look at it as where did the data come from? Is it representative of everyone that's using these models? And what's the quality of the data? We have to understand what the impact is on the workforce, right? Most jobs will start to incorporate generative AI, but there may be some jobs that move towards obsolescence, right? What we think and what has always happened with technologies is we've added more new jobs. So the net is we add jobs, but again, people have to learn new skills to acquire those jobs. We need to make sure there's not the intentional distribution of harmful content. So deep fakes, other synthetic content, synthetic content's defined as content that wasn't through machines or somehow through a business, but essentially content that someone creates. We talked about the lack of explainability and transparency could be a huge concern. Legal compliance, as we start to have more regulation, are we ensuring that we're not only in compliance with those regulations, but also supporting regulations, right? One of the biggest challenges with some of these generative AI models is they trained on content that was in the public domain, but has been protected by copyright or other legal in other legal manners. So should someone get paid because even though their content was in public domain? Think about song lyrics, right? Song lyrics end up in the public domain, but they're still copyrighted and they're still owned by an individual group, et cetera, right? So should they get compensated for that? And we need to ask, who is responsible, right? There's that whole value chain that I talked about, from those that have created these large language models to those who, in some cases, open source, like Llama from Meta, that are adding to them or utilizing them. Who becomes responsible for that? And again, many more as well. So let's consider what's next with the future of generative AI. Is the ability at some point for it to generate creative content that is indistinguishable from human created content. Again, right now, there is ways to identify. A lot of times in the text, you'll see the generative AI writes sentences that are near equivalent in length. Humans typically don't do that. The images, you can see some of the images, and you're like, that may not be something that a human would develop, but they are becoming better and more sophisticated. And again, at some point, indistinguishable from what we can do. Again, using generative AI to augment and automate tasks, right? So think about that is, as we start to think about how we use generative AI, it's how can we automate tasks that are lower level, that are repetitive, and so we can focus on the higher level tasks that require more cognitive capabilities, more creative, et cetera. We also will see personalized application and digital experiences, right? We're already starting to see this more and more often today, right? The fact is, if I do a Google search and then I go to another website, I may see a specific ad. We're now seeing that, moving to other forms of media as well. And then ability to improve communications with computers and other language speakers, right? Generative AI may help us better communicate in general, right? I mean, we've already seen that. I was just traveling in France a couple months ago. I have a little bit of Spanish, but I don't speak very much French at all. But I could use Google Translate, so I was able to communicate, through Google Translate to people that were unable to speak English, and were in the cases where I was, and obviously unable to speak French. So that's a great example of that. And AI is the top priority. Well, there's been a lot of focus on data and the visualization data, the analytics, big data, et cetera. But the fact is when queried, top investment priorities by most organizations now was focused on AI. In fact, 2-to-1 over data. So it is the #1 priority in most organizations. They realize they're at this inflection point where if they don't adopt AI and their competitor does, they're likely to become less competitive. So many organizations are determining how they're going to utilize AI to further their organization, whether that's from product development, from customer service, from research and design, operations, supply chain management, whatever it may be. There's a variety of ways that it could potentially assist them. And the fact is most organizations don't have people with the knowledge and skills they need to fully employ artificial intelligence. So you can see there's 2/3 said of organizations don't have enough employees with skills, even though half of those organizations already use those technologies, and the other half are going to use them in the next couple of years. So the fact is that what you're doing today, right, starting to make yourself at least develop a foundational understanding of what these technologies are, is the first step. And as we'll see, more and more organizations are going to be seeking people, not only technologists, not only machine learning engineers, data scientists, and AI ethicists, but also individuals across the organization in marketing, sales, operations, legal, et cetera, that understand these technologies, because again, we're going to be employing them across the organization. Here's a sample pathway again. If interested in learning more about AI, obviously you can speak with the folks at GoPOS and talk about, if I'm a product or project manager, a business leader, a consultant, a sales or marketing professional, I may just need to know the foundational concepts. So what is, helping us to understand the terminology? How are these applications technologies used in a business setting? And then how would I go about either participating or leading in a project? So really all you need is to understand the foundational concepts. If you are someone that wants to become a technologist, you might want to start to move towards the right? If you already have programming skills, you can skip over the programming fundamentals. If you don't, Python is the predominantly used language in artificial intelligence. There is others, but it is the most often used. You are going to learn, even with artificial intelligence, you're going to want to have some data science skills. AI is heavily dependent on data. Without data, AI doesn't exist. So we do, within AI, we're selecting algorithms, we're training those algorithms, but we're training it with data. The better your data is, typically the better the model is going to become and perform. Then you would go on to gain a professional certification like the Certified AI Practitioner. And then you may go on to something vendor specific, right? If you're operating in AWS or Microsoft Azure or a Google Cloud platform, et cetera. And then there are separate, we advise that everyone in the technology field also should understand the ethical use of AI, but there's also an emerging field of AI and data ethic and ethicists. Some call them tech ethicists as well. But essentially people that are being employed to ensure that organizations are developing that AI solutions that will meet future regulations, but also compliance with expected practices within an organization and other existing regulations as well. So in summary, again, generative AI uses text, right, prompts to instruct models to create novel content, right? So we saw some of those output today with text and code. I might try to go back and show the image one in a moment. Generative AI is used pervasively throughout industry today, even though really it's only been a publicly available for less than a year, and it's going to become more so. Again, we saw just briefly that effective prompting requires knowledge and practice, right? So this is going to be a learned skill that we are all going to need to have if we don't already have it today. We need to consider the ethical use of generative AI, right? With any, again, autonomous technologies where machines are making decisions, we need to make sure that there's a human in the loop and that human understands how those algorithms are making decisions, and they're doing so in a way that's responsible and at minimum not causing harm and hopefully doing good. And again, what we saw at the end is that we really need to understand that generative AI is, again, changing the skills we need to thrive. And so this is going to be a period where many of us are going to have to, again, upskill, reskill, whatever it may be, to make sure that we're capable of doing our jobs today and maybe the jobs of tomorrow as well. So I do want to share that there's some recommended courses from GoPOS that may be of interest to you. Some of these were on that earlier slide. So there's the Artificial Intelligence for Business and the generative AI for Business. So the Artificial Intelligence for Business is typically a half-day course. The Generative AI for Business, Gen AI Biz, is a brand new course that's a day long. And again, it'll go into much greater depth. You'll actually get to do hands-on in the Generative AI Biz and actually do prompting in the various tool sets, some that we looked at today and others beyond that as well. Then there's, if those who want to go on to a technical profession, again, there's this. Well, I want to thank everyone for taking the time today. I realize your time is your most valuable asset, so I really appreciate it. Again, please feel free to reach out to our partners at GoPOS if you do want to gain a further understanding of these technologies. Please feel free to connect to me on LinkedIn as well. And I really want to thank you, everyone. And I do hope you attend future sessions as well. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day.